Oh, seriously. To be honest, I'm upset to my core. I'm so Twitter will never let you down if you need a video idea. It just it just will never ever ever let you down. So what's the reason I'm kind of upset? Like I'm not furious, and you could tell that my voice is kind of even, but I just like I'm so sick of this whole thing, just to be honest. And you know what? I'm kind of glad that it's taken me so many years to work on my trilogy because it really has just kind of solidified for me why I just don't think that I want to go through mainstream publishing. So, as you can see, there is a tweet from Chuck Dixon. I go on Twitter very rarely nowadays, like just very rarely because it's like a black hole. You could get completely lost in it, and I'm sorry, I have better things to do with my time than get lost in the black hole of Twitter. But apparently, not everyone can get lost, or not everyone is, you know, not everyone desires to keep away from getting lost. Geez. Apparently, people love to get lost in the black hole of Twitter. And some of those people stay on Twitter all day. Some of them tweet ridiculous things, and some of them just let's not even go into it. So, my original thing that I wanted to talk about was kind of like the idea of, you know, looking at the villains. And there was a tweet from EVS that I was going to use. And then this popped up on my timeline, and it just really kind of like it still goes with the EVS tweet because basically what EVS was saying, and he's absolutely right, is there's this cry from the other side to there was a cry from the other side to either put up or shut up when it came to making comics. So diversity in comics was like, okay, well then he made a comic, and then they got upset and they put a stop to him being able to put it through publishing. With these other campaigns that are being successful, they're now trying to cut across that success, and they're trying to make sure that people's lives are being destroyed. And, EVS kind of pointed out, okay, you told us to, go away from your industry. So we did, and we're doing our own thing, and you're still coming after us. And it's sort of like, who are the bad guys here? And there is a saying in writing fiction, and it's absolutely true, that the villain is the hero of their own story. That's why villains, really like the best villains will be completely complex, you know, because their motivation will be wrapped up in how they kind of develop their worldview and how they develop their way of thinking. And it'll be wrapped up in how they, in particular, you know, do what they do and why they do it. So here's where the tweet from Chuck Dixon comes in, where he just says, "These people are dangerous." Now, I had to read the article because it's talking about classics. Now, I'm one of those where I believe, like, okay, full disclosure, as a kid, I never understood why we had to read such sorry. I never understood why we had to read certain books. in school. And it wasn't that they weren't good when I started reading them. It was really just sort of, as a kid, you just kind of want to either read what you want to read or, like for me, I was always creative and I just wanted, to do what I wanted to do. But there were plenty of books that I thoroughly enjoyed that were considered classics. And, now I look back and I say, you know what? The world is probably like our worldview or not even our worldview, but I think that we as people are kind of better off when we go back and we look at certain classics. And it kind of bothers me that there's been this push to stop people from reading the classics just because these classics may say things that progressives don't like. And that's a bit of a problem. I was listening to this podcast. This was last year. I listened to this podcast, and Rabbi Daniel Lapin, he is a rabbi who has a podcast for The Blaze. And I really kind of enjoy listening to his podcast because it's sort of like, even for me as a Christian, it's just, kind of interesting to hear other views. And he's sort of, he's sort of one who's sort of like, even Christians need a rabbi. And he did this podcast where he was talking about this trend of getting rid of things in history that certain people don't like, or, this revisionism that's going on, where we don't like certain traits that people had, therefore we're going to completely do away with everything that they did, and we're going to rewrite history to say what we wanted to say because history is too problematic. And he was talking about how, as a Jewish man, he owns Nazi paraphernalia. And, he was saying that he owns it because it was a part of his people's history. And, this is history that happened that cannot be denied. And so getting rid of it, would be worse than admitting that it happened. And I get what he's saying because at the time it was with the whole debate about whether or not we should get rid of Confederate statues and things like that. And I don't agree, and I still don't agree with getting rid of the Confederate statues because let's be honest, the Civil War happened. There were people who fought on each side who had ideology, that we may or may not have agreed with. But at this point, they are still historical figures. Literature is the same way. It is a piece of history because it's a piece of the way that people thought and saw the world. That's why I would even say, even with a lot of these SJW novels now, I wouldn't say that, well, they have no right to publish it because by all means, if you wrote a book and you can get it published, then get it published. That's part of why the free market exists because people will buy what they like. So then you get into something like this, where now you have this idea of let's revise history. Let's get rid of, books or stop reading books that I don't like because it has problems with it. And sorry. So the guy who wrote the article was essentially talking about he was trying to reread the book, The Once and Future King. And in reading The Once and Future King, he didn't like the way that they spoke about Native Americans, and he didn't like that the N-word was used. That's fine. But then he went on this thing, and this is really the crux of my kind of problem because it's still that idea of using, minorities as this shield. And Diversity in Comics had he, because he's talked about this before, where he's sort of like, these, especially these white male liberals, they see blacks and, other minorities and LGBT people and all of that, they see them as being like between a smart dog and a disabled child. And, it's like the more you pay attention to it, the more you listen to these people, I'd already figured that out for myself years before, but it kind of just keeps hitting you in the face because part of the problem is, part of the problem is this, and this is where I really, of course, got upset, but it's sort of like where, oh, well, can I recommend the book to one of my African American friends? And, should I put caveats in there? Like this idea as if, we just can't think for ourselves and we have to be told, how, I hate that they don't treat humans as humans. And it kind of bringing it back to the whole thing about them really being villains. They aren't they aren't even really being good villains at the same time because they're all being very cookie cutter. Now, for me, Tor publishing this thing is really kind of personal for me because, Tor was one of the companies that I wanted to get my book published through. Daw was the other one, but like looking at what Tor is becoming and seeing all of this is just like it's terrible. So, essentially his thing is because books have problems or because authors had problems in the past and these are considered classics, do we recommend these classics to others? And it's sort of like, so now we're saying it's sort of like that the whole book burning argument. Should we get rid of things that we don't like because it says things that we don't like? Let's pretend like it never happened and we'll just get rid of everything that goes against what we believe because it says things that now we don't like, and like most of the stuff that he even talks about is probably stuff that nobody even notices because overall, oh, you stupid computer, because overall, let's be honest, we're talking we're talking books. We're talking about books that are good stories. You know, I know that I'm getting off on this tangent and I'm going to try to stay focused. But this all goes back to good storytelling because here's the thing. If a character who says a certain word that you don't like is the bad guy, why is it a problem that that bad guy said a word that you don't like? If there was a certain prevailing attitude going on at a certain time and people were speaking with that prevailing attitude, why is that a problem? It's a reality of the time that it was. And so to sit there and say that, well, we shouldn't recommend it now and we shouldn't enjoy it privately, or to say that, we should combat it by finding things that says everything that we wanted to say or create things that says everything that we wanted to say with no regards to the story because even when because he talks about, I guess, a book that he's written, to combat Tolkien, the whole Middle Earth thing, because now we're going to have a female lead because they didn't have enough female leads. in Tolkien's book. And, she's going to be privileged and she's going to have her views challenged. And, and it's sort of like, okay, that could be an interesting story, but not if this is your sell, where it's sort of like, oh, the guys that she thought were the good guys because they were elf-like creatures, they're possibly the bad guys because the people that they're fighting, oh, they could be the good guys. And so now we're blurring the lines of morality for the sake of not good storytelling, but politics, essentially, because the argument that they're making is the argument of politics, and they're trying to cloak it in this idea of, well, no, we're just doing good storytelling, even though, no, what we're pushing is politics, because we shouldn't have to talk about authors like Ursula Le Guin, you know, because if her stories are good, and I'll be honest, I've never read any of her books. But if the only thing that you can say is that, well, she had female leads because she didn't like that there weren't female leads in other classics. Okay, well, now you just made it political. If we're talking about Saladin Ahmed, Ahmed, of which, of course, he talks about Saladin in this, which the first few issues of Black Bolt, I didn't get through the whole thing, but especially because, whatever, his Twitter just disgusts me. But his first few issues of Black Bolt was actually really good, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But this idea that because he sets his characters in a world of, sort of like the Middle East with like Muslim leads and Muslim characters and things like that, to push that and to say, well, that's being anti like the classics, and that's hitting back at the classics, like you're not doing people a favor by boiling their work down to purely being about politics. And like that's really kind of why I'm upset, because this is the fantasy genre. This is a genre I'm thoroughly interested in. I cannot, like, I wouldn't be able to, in good faith or in good conscience, want to put my books there, because I wouldn't want my stuff to be used to further this agenda, and like I wouldn't want what I would hope to be considered a good story or even a great story to be minimized because of politics. And like this is where I agree with Chuck Dixon in that these people are dangerous, and they are dangerous because you speak to regular people who aren't really active in doing this kind of research and looking at Twitter, at these authors, at these comic book creators, at these artists and things like that. They're not really they're not really into the hobby. They're not avid into it. They're not consumers of these things. In telling them the things that are going on, it's incredible to them, because to them, I know to most of them, it's sort of like, well, it's just a silly hobby to them. But also, there's this element of, well, why would people really be like that? And we know that it's a matter of this prevailing ideology. Like, I am not a centrist. I'm not even center right. There is very little that I will find common ground with someone who is on the left. But a common ground I can find with someone is the idea of good storytelling. And that doesn't mean that there can't be political elements or ideological elements. I read C.S. Lewis's Chronicle of Narnia. I read the whole thing as a teenager, not even knowing that it was actually a Christian allegory. Because it didn't matter to me, because it was just a great story. And so we're losing out on that aspect of a story just being a good story, because stories nowadays that are winning awards and are being pushed forward are not actually good stories. They're stories that are being pushed because they have a political agenda. And if you've seen the video that I did about, the article talking about making video games, progressive and pushing far left ideology. Like, this is where we are. We are being told, we're being told what we're going to think. We're being told now openly, because now they're being more honest about their agenda. They want us to be obedient to their ideology. They want us to be obedient to their way of thinking. They don't want to play nice. They're not looking to live and let live. They're looking to make people obey. And that is a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous ideology. And Chuck Dixon is absolutely right. These people are so, so dangerous. And it has become increasingly important for actual creators who have great stories and have talent for it. It is absolutely critical now that we begin putting out our own work, that we begin engaging with fans, that we, begin taking advantage of, the destructive nature of what we're seeing. Because if we cannot do that, we will be losing. We will be losing fans. We will be losing these hobbies. They cannot, they will never be able to sustain themselves if we don't take action. There's a store here in Chicago that's closing, but it's sort of like Marshall Fields when they closed. And, we're talking stores that have been open for hundreds of years. And, I say all the time, well, they closed because they didn't see the signs. They didn't see the signs of the time. We need to see the signs of the time. We need to pay attention. We need to understand that what we are seeing is no longer just the symptoms. It's like becoming septic. If you can't get to the root of, if you can't, be aggressive in, sort of if we can't be aggressive in the treatment, then we will be overrun. And the treatment, of course, is more great stories that leave our personal politics behind. It means, being like Sean Gordon Murphy and saying, yes, this is the ideology that I would espouse, but when it comes to my work, I'm going to leave all of that out of it, because I just want to tell a good story. And you can make people think. There's no problem in making people, there's no problem in telling a story where people think. But by all means, let's not browbeat people and be manipulative and trying to make people think the way that we want them to think. That's what I have to say. I know that this probably, well, no, I'm not going to say that, because I'm not going to say it got away from me, because I said exactly the things that I wanted to say. And I'm tired of this whole thing. And it's kind of why I don't have a problem with doing the YouTube videos, because I can get these out and then I can go on, because I will be turning off Twitter right after this because I got work to do. And so I will see you all in the next video. Have a great day.